So now we do have a variable keeping track of our score. Let's learn how to create an actual scoreboard to display this variable in the world. In order to do this, we'll go into our content drawer and I'm going to create a new folder preemptively here. And I'm going to call this folder widgets. And we're going to go inside of this folder and I'm going to right click, go to user interface, and then open up a widget blueprint. Now this is going to be a user widget and I'm going to call this my scoreboard. Once that's created, you can double click to open it up. So this is a representation of our widget and we're going to use widgets to display things on our screen. Now to create a very simple widget, what we're first going to do is we need to create a canvas. And I'm going to search my palette here for something called the canvas panel. I'm going to take this canvas panel, I'm going to drag it into my scoreboard. The canvas panel is basically a representation of the screen that you're working with, and if you don't have a canvas panel, things can get weird really quick. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to search for something called a text box. And it's just called the text, and I'm going to make that a child of the canvas panel. And now we can see that we have this little text block in the top left-hand corner. If I click on my text block, it's going to bring up a ton of different variables. The one that I want to talk about right now is called anchor pointing. This anchor point is going to dictate from where our transform and rotation take place. So if I anchor the top middle, my transform and position are going to adjust based off of where I'm changing my anchor point to. So in this case, I do want my score to display in the middle of the screen, and then I can reset my X position in order to make sure that I get to my new snap point. Now from there, we have this concept called alignment. In general, alignment is a number from 0 to 1 that dictates how aligned you want to be with your anchor point. In this case, I want my anchor to be halfway on both the X and Y axis so that it looks proper. Now, if I go and I zoom in here, we can see that things look a little weird. So we may not want this to be at 0.5. Let's see what happens when I change this to 0. We can see that looks much better and looks almost, dare I say, natural. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set this text to be a variable that we can control. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm first going to change this tick box here to turn on is variable. And then from there down here, the content of our text box needs to be binded to this new blueprint that we have. So when we go back into Designer in the top right, we can now see that the content of our text block is going to be binded to this value called getText_0, which was created inside of Blueprint here. So now back to Designer once more. We can also create the size to make this not so tiny. And the way we do that is we're going to go into Appearance and we can open up the Font tab here, and now I can just expand this font until it makes me happy. And then from there, we're going to have to go back up to the top and adjust the size of our slot as well. So we're going to have to slide this out so that it better encompasses our new text block, and we can do the same on the Y so that it gets to about the right point. I'm not being super precise, but you can be as precise as you want. Then we can still see that we are now properly set up. So now we're going to go into our graph and we have some things that we need to do. We need to set this value to be equal to the score that is attached to our bird. So first, we need to get a reference to our bird. And in order to do this, we are going to cheat. The reason we get to cheat is because there's only one bird in our world at any given time. So we're going to go and we're going to swap away from this getText0 and we're going to go into the event graph. So there's this handy event called event construct, which is called whenever we're constructing our widget inside the world. So this is called very early on. Now the reason we're cheating here is we know there's only one bird, right? So we're going to go and we're going to call something called getActorOfClass. Make sure you're clicking on getActorOfClass because we are going to go and we're going to get one of the actors of our BP bird class. And then from there, we're going to be able to cast this to BP bird because this is going to basically confirm that we are in fact working with the type of variable that we think we're working with. And then I'm just going to drag the return value from that get object into the object for our cast. If this succeeds, we're going to do something. But first, if this does happen to fail, I do want to print something. So I'm just going to print a string for debugging purposes called "you failed." But if this does succeed, we are going to want to set a variable. So we are now going to take this bird that we found, and we know this bird is going to be our bird, and I'm going to right click on this pin and I'm going to promote this to a variable. And that is automatically going to say that if this succeeds, we are going to set the variable value to be our bird. And I'm now going to change this variable name that came up to just bird because that is so much easier than as a bird. So now we have a reference to our bird player that is going to be in the world. So now when we go and we navigate back to getText0 here, we are going to be able to drag in our bird variable and get our bird. So now what we can do is we can drag off of our bird and we're going to call our getter method that we set up previously called getOurScore. But what's funny is this isn't showing up. Why is that? Well, when we go into our code, if we remember, when we go into our header file here, we set this to be a public method, but we didn't say we could get it within Blueprint. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that now, and we're going to say that this is a U function that is going to be Blueprint callable. And this is still going to be our getScore method. So now when I save this and then compile that new change, once that succeeds, we'll be able to drag off of our bird variable and look for something called getScore, which is now going to show up as we expect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to rearrange this. We're going to change the order. We're basically going to say that we're going to get our value for getText, and we're going to make it equal to this bird. And then we're going to say that we want to return the value of our score. Now what's interesting here is you'll notice that this is green and this is pink. This is because these represent different types of data, but we are able to easily convert from an integer to text automatically whenever we let go. And you can see here that this is now taking it so that we have whatever we're returning is equal to the value that is present within the integer that is our score from our bird. So now let's compile and save. Now that is basically the setup of our scoreboard. Now we need to actually put our scoreboard in the game. So to do that, we're going to close out of our scoreboard and we're going to go back to our content and we're going to find our birdie game mode or whatever game mode you're working with. Inside here, we're going to open up our full editor and now we have access to our big game mode. So now we have to actually make this widget show up in the world. So within this game mode here, we are going to go and we are going to create a widget. So we're going to pull off of begin play because we want this to happen when the game starts. And I'm going to drag off and I'm going to call create widget. And here we basically get to choose what widget we want to create. And in this case, the widget that we want to create would be our scoreboard. Now from here, with this widget created, we then need to call add to viewport because this is what's actually going to put it in our game. And to make sure we're actually putting something in our game, we have to make sure we fill in the target with the widget that we actually just created. So now when I compile and save this here, I'll close this for visibility and then hit play. We can see we now have a scoreboard. Now what you might be thinking at this point is, hey, what gives? You said that we anchored this to the middle, but this clearly does not look like the middle of your Flappy Bird screen. What's going on? That's a good question. So in order to get that middle alignment that we are desperately craving at this point, we're going to go into our text block, and then we're going to change our anchor. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to use the big top text anchor. Now this is going to bind my top text to the length of this screen. Now from there, I need to change my offset on both the left and the right to be the default values because that's going to help it stay in the middle. And then since this is a little bit off, I do want to go and I want to make sure that this is properly zeroed out to make sure that this is actually matching the edge here. Now the size is still fine. I'm okay with the alignment, but now I need to scroll down here to justification. And I'm going to change my justification to middle. Now from here, if I compile and save, if I just play in my viewport, now you can see that this is in the direct center of my viewport. And this is the easiest way I've found to create this simple scoreboard for use in our games.